Do you remember those back-to-school dinners your mama made in the 1960s? Simple meals that showed up like clockwork. No frills, no fuss, just love on a plate. When did we trade them in for takeout bags and microwave trays? And why did we ever let them go? Baked pork chops with apples and onions. Now this was a school night dinner that smelled like autumn and tasted like home. Mama would sear thick-cut pork chops in her cast-iron skillet, then layer them in a baking dish with sliced apples and onions. Sometimes even a spoonful of brown sugar or a splash of apple juice if she was feeling fancy. She'd cover the whole thing with foil and slide it into the oven, letting it bake low and slow until the pork was tender and the apples had practically melted into a sticky, savory sweet glaze. The house would fill with that warm cinnamon and skillet scent that made you forget all about the pop quiz you flunked. She'd serve it with buttered rice or instant mashed potatoes, maybe some green beans if she had time. This was a quiet, comforting meal that wrapped around you like your favorite quilt. It wasn't the cheapest dinner, but it was one of the most loved. And when the whole family showed up at the table, no one needed to be called twice. TV dinners, Swanson style. Okay, maybe Mama didn't make this one from scratch, but she sure made it feel like a treat. If it was open house night, or she was too tired from ironing pleated skirts and packing lunches, we'd each get our own little silver tray pulled from the freezer. The Swanson fried chicken dinner was the gold standard. Crispy drumsticks, mashed potatoes with that odd gravy crater, corn niblets, and a molten square of brownie stuck in the corner like a science experiment. We'd peel back the foil and wait as it baked in the oven for 25 minutes. And then we'd sit on the shag carpet, legs crossed, balancing the tray on our laps while watching Bewitched or Bonanza. Sure, it was full of salt and mystery meat, but it felt like luxury. For once, nobody had to do dishes or ask why the green beans were mushy. TV dinners weren't just food. They were permission to rest, to relax, and to eat with your elbows on the couch. That silver tray meant it was one of those nights, and we loved it. Hamburger and onion gravy over white bread. This was Southern survival food at its finest. Mama would brown up a pound of ground beef with sliced onions, maybe toss in a bouillon cube or two, and whip up a quick gravy using flour and bacon drippings. The whole thing got poured right over plain white sandwich bread, sunbeam or bunny if you were lucky. The bread soaked up all that rich, salty gravy like a sponge, turning into a soft, savory pile of comfort. It wasn't pretty, but it sure was filling, and it was ready in under 20 minutes, which meant more time for book reports and long division tears at the kitchen table. This was the kind of dinner you made when payday was 2 days off, and you still had mouths to feed. We never thought of it as a struggle meal. It was just what folks did. And the funny thing is, we'd probably still eat it today if someone else made it for us. Chicken pot pie. Usually made from leftover Sunday chicken, pot pie night was a crowd pleaser. That golden crust puffed up just enough to hide the bubbling center of creamy gravy, diced carrots, peas, and potato cubes. If it was homemade, Mama might stretch a little roast chicken with canned soup and a Pillsbury crust. But even the banquet ones hit the spot when you were 9 and hungry. It came out of the oven piping hot, and you'd poke at it with a fork until the steam cleared and the center wasn't hot enough to blister your tongue. There was something so satisfying about breaking that crust open. It felt like uncovering treasure. It was the kind of dinner that looked special, even if it only cost 50 cents a person. And on a Wednesday night in September, that was more than enough. Sloppy Joes. You could hear the skillet sizzling from the driveway. Mama would brown the ground beef, then stir in ketchup, mustard, and just enough brown sugar to give it that tangy kick. She'd spoon it onto soft hamburger buns, sometimes toasted under the broiler, sometimes straight from the bag, and serve it up with a scoop of potato salad or corn chips on the side. Sloppy Joes were, well, sloppy, and that was half the fun. You'd bite into it, and the filling would slide out the back end of the bun, down your wrist, and maybe onto your math homework. They were quick, messy, and wildly satisfying. If you were really lucky, there'd be enough left over to make one for lunch the next day, wrapped in wax paper and tucked into your lunchbox with a thermos of milk. In a world of neat casseroles and tidy sides, Sloppy Joes were a joyful kind of chaos. Creamed chipped beef on toast. Some folks called it SOS, but Mama just called it Tuesday. Thin slices of salty dried beef, straight from the glass jar, got chopped and stirred into a white gravy made from butter, flour, and whole milk. She'd serve it spooned over hot toast or biscuits, and it'd spread like warm wallpaper paste in the best possible way. It was salty, creamy, and simple. A little bland, maybe, but comforting as a hug. No vegetables, no sides, just plate-sopping goodness that filled you up and knocked you out. It was the kind of dish that felt like a throwback, even back then, a Depression-era recipe that stuck around because it worked. And when report cards weren't great, or the furnace started making that noise again, creamed beef showed up to say, "It's gonna be okay." Canned spaghetti with buttered white bread. This was the lazy night special. A can of Franco-American, or Chef Boyardee spaghetti, never quite hot enough, got dumped into a saucepan and stirred while you set the table. No meatballs, no parmesan, no pretense. Just soft noodles and tomato mush, served with 2 slices of buttered white bread folded over and stuck to the side of your plate like edible napkins. It was oddly satisfying, even if you knew it came from a can. And it was done in 5 minutes flat, which gave Mama time to fold laundry or call Aunt Ethel back before bedtime. We didn't call it Italian, we just called it dinner, and it got the job done. Meatloaf with ketchup glaze, the midweek masterpiece. Mama would mash together ground beef, breadcrumbs, eggs, onions, and maybe a dash of Worcestershire if she had some on hand. She'd pack it into a loaf pan, slather it with ketchup, or a brown sugar glaze if she was feeling extra, and bake it low and slow until the top started to crisp. The smell alone could make your mouth water from the driveway. She'd serve it with mashed potatoes and green beans, and if you cleaned your plate, maybe a pudding cup afterward. Leftovers made for the best sandwiches the next day, cold and sliced thick between 2 pieces of white bread. Meatloaf was a staple. Not glamorous, not trendy, just solid, comforting, and always there when you needed it. Macaroni and tomatoes. A true Southern classic, this was comfort food on a dime. Elbow macaroni boiled until tender, stirred into stewed canned tomatoes, and finished with a big old pat of butter and a sprinkle of black pepper. Some folks added sugar, others a little onion or bacon grease. Either way, it was warm, simple, and soothing. The kind of thing you didn't even need a recipe for, served as a side or sometimes as the whole meal with a slice of cornbread. It stretched $1 farther than most dishes could dream. And on a chilly school night when nobody wanted to run to the store, this dish came through like an old friend. Salisbury steak with brown gravy. This was Mama's way of making Hamburger feel fancy. She'd form patties from seasoned ground beef, sometimes adding breadcrumbs and onion soup mix, then pan-fry them and simmer them in a thick brown gravy made from pan drippings and a bouillon cube. Served alongside mashed potatoes and peas, it felt like a TV dinner, but better because it was homemade. The gravy soaked into everything on the plate, and you'd use your last bite of roll to mop it all up. It was hearty and rich, and just the kind of meal that made you forget your long division meltdown or the scab on your knee from recess. Salisbury steak night felt special, even when you were eating off chipped Corelle plates at a sticky Formica table. Stuffed bell peppers. This was Mama's attempt at gourmet, though nobody in the house knew what that meant. She'd slice the tops off green bell peppers, usually the ones on sale at A&P that week, and stuff them with a mix of ground beef, instant rice, ketchup, and a sprinkle of Lowry's if she had it. The peppers would get a little wrinkly in the oven, but that filling, hot, tangy, and strangely satisfying. We'd cut them up with our forks like civilized folks, though every kid secretly wished Mama would just make meatballs instead. Still, it felt like a grown-up meal, especially if it came with a little sprinkle of cheddar on top. Fancy in a someone's coming over kind of way, even if it was just the school librarian returning your overdue book. Hot dog and potato hash, also known as whatever's left in the fridge hash. Mama would chop up hot dogs like she was mad at them, toss them in a skillet with diced potatoes, onions, maybe a green pepper if one was rolling around in the crisper. Add a splash of oil, some salt, and a little sizzle, and boom, you had dinner. It was smoky, starchy, and had a rebellious charm. You'd eat it with ketchup, of course, because back then, ketchup was basically a food group. We might have called it dinner, but really, it was an edible shrug. Still, it stuck to your ribs and bought Mama a little piece while she tried to sew a button back on your school coat. Tamale loaf. Yes, you heard that right. Tamale loaf. This was one of those recipes clipped from a magazine with suspicious optimism. A can of tamales, paper wrappers removed if someone remembered, mixed with cornmeal, beef, tomato sauce, and mystery spices, then baked in a loaf pan until it could stand up on its own. It was spicy by 1960s standards, which meant it had maybe one shake of chili powder in the whole thing. But it made you feel like you were eating something adventurous, especially if Mama served it with canned corn and a dollop of sour cream that came from a cottage cheese container. You never really loved it, but it sure made an impression. Spam and pineapple rings. This was what happened when Mama was out of groceries but wanted to pretend she wasn't. She'd slice up a can of Spam like it was a delicacy, fry the edges till they curled, then crown each slice with a pineapple ring and a maraschino cherry like it was Sunday brunch at the Holiday Inn. The sweet and salty combo was polarizing, to say the least. Some of us loved it. Others just quietly slid the pineapple to the dog under the table. But it looked festive, and that counted for something, especially when you were eating it off a plate shaped like a TV tray with the atomic starburst pattern. Rice with ground beef and brown gravy. This was the don't ask, just eat dinner. Ground beef, fried with onions and maybe some garlic powder, poured over white rice with a little packet gravy or bouillon-thickened drippings. Sometimes Mama called it mock steak tips, which was ambitious. But we didn't mind. It was hot, brown, and in a bowl, which meant it could be eaten in front of the TV without a knife. It was also one of those dinners that tasted better the next day, especially if you accidentally fell asleep with your homework still in your lap. Not pretty, not exciting, but somehow deeply satisfying. Turkey necks and dumplings. This was Southern frugality at its finest. If Mama had a package of turkey necks in the freezer, and Lord help you, she usually did, she'd toss them in a pot, boil them with onions, salt, and whatever looked green, and then whip up a batch of flour dumplings to drop right in. You had to pick around the bones like you were digging for treasure, but that broth, rich and golden, like liquid comfort. The dumplings soaked it up like little edible sponges. Sure, it wasn't glamorous, but it was homey, filling, and full of flavor. And if you ever dared complain, Mama would say, then you mustn't be that hungry. Chicken livers and rice, a polarizing dish if there ever was one. Mama would fry those livers in bacon grease with onions until the whole house smelled like, well, fried organ meat, served over white rice with gravy. It was an iron-rich punch to the taste buds. Some kids hid the livers under their napkin. Others cleaned their plate and asked for seconds. It was the kind of dinner that built character, or at least taught you the value of ketchup as camouflage. You didn't always love it, but you respected it. And honestly, it tasted a whole lot better than whatever mystery meat the school cafeteria was serving that week. Bologna and egg fried rice. This was fusion cooking before we knew what fusion was. Leftover rice from Sunday dinner, fried up with scrambled eggs and chopped bologna. Maybe a splash of soy sauce if Mama had a bottle in the back of the cupboard. From that one time, she tried to make chow mein. It was salty, greasy, and addictive. We'd eat it out of mismatched bowls with big spoons, sitting cross-legged on the floor, while Gilligan's Island played in the background. This was survival food with flair, made from scraps but remembered fondly. Like most of the best things from childhood. Creamy chicken and stovetop biscuits. No, not actual stovetop stuffing. We're talking biscuit dough spooned on top of a pot of creamy chicken stew and baked until golden. The base was usually Campbell's cream of chicken, mixed with leftover bits of Sunday's bird, frozen peas, and maybe some carrots if Mama had time to peel them. When it came out of the oven, it looked like a bubbling science project with biscuit craters on top, but it smelled like heaven. This was comfort food with extra warmth, especially if the house still had a chill in the air and you'd forgotten your sweater at school again. Corned beef hash with ketchup. This came straight from a red and white can, and honestly, it didn't need much else. Mama would fry it in a cast-iron skillet until the edges crisped, press it flat like a pancake, and serve it with eggs if she was feeling generous. Most nights, though, it was just hash and a healthy squirt of ketchup. It was greasy, salty, and weirdly good. The kind of thing that stuck in your memory long after your homework was forgotten. You never knew whether to chew it or spread it, but either way, it was hot and ready in 5 minutes flat. And that's what mattered. Shepherd's pie with canned vegetable. This was a meal that tried its best to be British, but took a hard detour through the Piggly Wiggly. Mama would brown ground beef with onions, layer it with a drained can of vegetable, the one with the potatoes, peas, corn, and mysterious pale lima beans, and spread mashed potatoes across the top like frosting on a meat cake. Sometimes, she'd drag a fork across the top in a zigzag pattern, then broil it until the ridges turned golden. It was never quite pretty, but it was warm, hearty, and made you feel like you were eating something from another country. Even if that country was called Budget Land. Rice pudding for supper. This wasn't dessert, it was dinner, especially when the pantry was looking lean and nobody felt like arguing. Mama would stir leftover white rice with milk, sugar, a beaten egg, cinnamon, and sometimes a handful of raisins if you were being punished. It would bubble and thicken on the stovetop into a sweet, warm, pudding-like mess that stuck to your ribs and your soul. You'd eat it slow, hoping maybe you'd find a rogue clump of sugar or the golden skin off the top. It was poor folks' comfort food, served with love and a side of "we're making do, baby." Vienna sausages with buttered noodles. Those little canned sausages, squishy, pink, and suspicious, had their moment. Mama would slice them up and heat them in a skillet with a bit of the juice, don't ask, then serve them over a pile of egg noodles slathered in margarine. It was salty, soft, and slippery, and no one could ever quite explain why it worked. But it did. This wasn't a glamorous meal. It was a "we're out of everything but the weird stuff" kind of supper. And yet, you remember it, don't you? With just the faintest smile and maybe a little indigestion. Mock chicken legs. Yes, this was a thing. It wasn't chicken, it wasn't a leg. It was ground meat, usually pork and veal, molded onto a stick, breaded and fried to look like a chicken drumstick. They sold them pre-made at the A&P butcher, or you could assemble them at home with skewers and some culinary courage. They were weird, crunchy, and oddly satisfying, like a corn dog with commitment issues. And if Mama served them with boxed scalloped potatoes and Jell-O for dessert, you felt like you were eating at a cafeteria with flair. Cabbage and noodles, an Eastern European hand-me-down that ended up in Southern kitchens by way of practicality. Shredded cabbage, fried down in butter until it was soft and golden, tossed with wide egg noodles and black pepper. That's it. No meat, no sauce, no cheese. Just soft, buttery comfort that tasted better than it had any right to. You might not have loved it as a kid, but you sure remember it, especially if the cabbage smell lingered in the house for the next 3 days. Corn fritters and syrup. This was dinner disguised as breakfast disguised as dessert. A simple batter of corn, flour, eggs, and milk fried into golden little pancakes, then stacked on a plate and drizzled with cane syrup or Caro syrup. Some folks added chopped onion for a savory bite, but most kids just wanted them sweet. It was a meal that didn't make much sense, but nobody questioned it with a mouthful of fried corn and syrup. The only downside? There were never enough of them. Cheese dreams. These were fancier than grilled cheese, or at least Mama said so. Open-faced white bread slices topped with American cheese, a slice of tomato, and sometimes a sprinkle of dry mustard or paprika. She'd toast them under the broiler until the cheese bubbled and browned, and the tomato puckered like it had seen things. They were humble, sure, but weirdly addictive. You ate 2, sometimes 3, and washed them down with a glass of Tang like a champion. Baked eggplant with saltines and parmesan. If you grew up in a household where mama was trying to be healthy, eggplant night was inevitable. She'd slice it thin, salt it until it wept, like your little sister when she couldn't find her homework. Then dip it in egg, dredge it in crushed saltines, and bake it with a little sprinkle of parmesan. It wasn't lasagna, and it wasn't pizza, but it lived in that strange in-between world where vegetables pretended to be the main event. You didn't always love it, but you ate it, partly because you were hungry, and partly because you weren't allowed to leave the table until your plate was clean. Chili mac. When plain chili just didn't stretch far enough, Mama would toss in elbow macaroni and call it a new recipe. Sometimes it was homemade chili with actual ground beef and beans. Other times, it was 2 cans of Hormel and a Hail Mary. Either way, it was piping hot, a little spicy, and guaranteed to splatter all over your school clothes if you ate too fast. Chili mac was a one-pot wonder, served with saltines and maybe a slice of processed cheese if the stars aligned. Biscuit-topped hot dog casserole. Yep, this actually happened. Mama would slice up hot dogs, toss them in a casserole dish with baked beans or tomato sauce, then crown the whole thing with blobs of biscuit dough, usually from a tube she whacked on the counter like she was mad at it. It baked into something fluffy, smoky, and slightly unhinged. But you know what? We didn't complain. It was warm, filling, and had biscuits on top. That alone made it a weeknight win. There you have it. Back then, school nights weren't about convenience. They were about creativity, thrift, and making do with what you had. There were no meal kits, no food influencers, and certainly no fancy air fryers humming on the counter. Just mama, a cluttered pantry, and a whole lot of love disguised as ground beef and canned soup. Some of these meals were strange. Some were salty. A few were outright crimes against nutrition. But they filled the house with warmth, brought the family to the table, and gave us stories we're still telling today. So here's to those back-to-school dinners we don't see anymore. The quirky, cozy, and sometimes questionable plates that somehow made everything feel all right. Even when the meat was mystery and the gravy came from a packet, we ate every bite. And somehow, we still miss it.